So I asked Tom, we asked Tom to come on because I knew Tom had spoken about SATCOM in the past. I know he's a big proponent of it. Again, I was there under Joe Canine, who was the third SATCOM commander. Prior to him was Joe Dunn, was the original.
It was Ward, Jim Ward.
Oh, Jim Ward was?
Jim Ward was there for like a cup of coffee. Less than a year.
I didn't even know.
And then it was Espo, and then before that was Dunn.
Right. So you had two great leaders in Dunn and Espo who rose up, to the first deputy commissioner for Joe Dunn and for the chief of the longest running chief of department, and who we've talked about many times on the show, probably the best boss on this job, and Joe Esposito. And then Joe Canine, I have my opinions because I came in as an executive. I wasn't what I used to call a made man under the Joe Canine world. You really had to be a Joe Canine guy to succeed under his leadership. But under his leadership is when they dissolved SATCOM. It also had to do with the civil rights, report that was done on stops and everything else. And that was like the beginning of the end of SATCOM. But what Strategic and Tactical Command Brooklyn North was, let's talk about the structure, right? It was a specialized unit, right, that operated in Brooklyn North between 95 and 06, right? It came out of the CompStat strategy designed to aggressively combat crime, and it was focusing a lot on drug-related offenses because that drugs in Brooklyn North drove the crime for the vast majority, right? Centralized authority. SATCOM placed all detectives, all uniform police, and narcotics officers, as well as gang and vice, under the single commander of the SATCOM Brooklyn North, which is a two-star position. The command concentrated resources on highly trained supervisors, so they tried to bring in the best and put them out in the most crime-ridden precincts, particularly to combat the drugs. And there was early success that was highly celebrated in reducing crime. And the office, again, community relations, there was a good, strong relationship with the population in Brooklyn North. So that's basically what happens is, so for our viewers that don't know the structure of the police department, you have, we talked about different chiefs, right? Different ranks of chiefs. So you have the chief of detectives. Chief of detectives is in charge of all detective operations and all detective bureaus. That's narcotics, what used to be vice, the gang division, the actual precinct detective squads, the homicide squads, the special victims squads, all the different types of detectives fall under the chief of detective. Chief of patrol is in charge of all of the 7 precinct patrol precincts. The chief of housing is in charge of the 9 police service areas that cover the housing bureaus. And the chief of transit is in charge of the transit districts. Now, transit was not included in SATCOM. Transit was still standalone to the transit and answered to the chief of transit. But everybody else, except for special operations, the special operations division, which is where Rob, his forte with the emergency services and harbor, aviation, K9, all those special operations units was still under special operations and the chief of department. But everybody else theoretically answered to the one boss, the SATCOM commander. So in these conversations, I thought about it because I worked through it, and I said, that if done properly, which it was done for a lot of years, it could be a very successful model because it's centralized. And you have one person that's concerned about that one geographical area of employment. So it's almost like Brooklyn North was its own police department. Mm-hmm. And so we talk about that, and we talk about, the conversation has been had, should we have different sheriffs, so to speak, in each borough? Yeah. So the SATCOM model, that's how we kind of centralize it, to each patrol borough. So you were there, Tom, when on the inception, correct?
Yes, sir.
So why don't you tell us what you think about that decentralization and the ability of one person to lead for its own borough?
Yeah, so there's also a parallel in private sector business, and they have siloed and matrix organizations where they don't all report up, and they have what they call shared services, right? So as an example, if I'm working in a company and I'm trying to sell software, but my engineers don't answer to my CEO, all the software engineers answer to the CTO, who all they're going to do is battle with my CEO of my business, right? And so take that into the New York City Police Department. And I was actually transit, and then the merger took place, and then I was brought into the SATCOM model. So I didn't have a lot of NYPD practical experience other than observational. And then going into that, working 1 year, and then going into the narcotics, Brooklyn North Narcotics, I thought, wow, this is such a better organization, because I like the idea of accountability where you have one chief, one XO, then he had a commanding officer of detectives, a commanding officer of narcotics, the commanding officer of each precinct, and then PSAs in the housing sec, and they all answered up to him. And so, or her, all of the command staff meetings were all centralized. They were brought in, and we all talked together collectively. We shared information as it related to cases. Joey Herbert and I, in one of those meetings, connected Lincoln Navigators being sold in Ocean City, Maryland, and they were being used to commit crimes and steal PlayStations all over Brooklyn. We were able to connect those things, and it was a unified command where there was collaboration, communication with each other, and all answering under one boss. So in other words, that boss had the vision, was hearing everything holistically, what was going on in the borough, and was able to pull it all together and then move and shift those resources as appropriate. And I can give you, I was one of those resources that got moved very fast. When I got to Brooklyn North Narcotics, as an example, I was on vacation the very first week that they said report to command. So I go to the Brooklyn Navy Yard, which was condemned at the time, but we were still there for 2 years, right? At the Brooklyn Navy Yard, they divvied up the modules in the 7-7 precinct, and they told me, Tom, you're the sergeant, you've got this narcotics team, but you are assigned to the precinct module. And I was like, wait, what is that? And why did I get the precinct module? And you don't get undercovers because we can't send undercovers to the precinct. So you're essentially a glorified SNU team, Street Narcotics Enforcement Unit, do observations. If you have to borrow an undercover, you can borrow an undercover, and that's it. And I'm like, well, how did I draw the short end of the stick? And they said to me, well, you were on vacation, so you didn't get a say. So I got stuck with it, right? Well, it turned out to be a blessing. Again, opportunity, preparedness. I get there. The detective commander was a guy named Jimmy Dugan. There was a sergeant there, Tom Coomey, in the 7-7 precinct squad. Richie Johnson was there. But the captain was Charlie Wells. And for anyone who knows who Charlie Wells is, he's an absolute legend. I've learned more about doing detective work and homicide work and criminal investigations from him than anybody else on the job, although there are a lot. I love that man so much, and he's a true American hero. He was a tunnel rat in Vietnam, shot and killed somebody in a hostage situation on Times Square, and just a great investigator. He ran Intel. Anyone who knows the Handshoe Act on Intel and running operatives in Intel, it's because of his case. He was running undercovers as a single lieutenant with no one else knowing it. Really just a tremendous guy. And we were doing so much good work. And by the way, who's in my team? Rodney Johnson, police commissioner of Suffolk County, former chief of department, was in my team. He was a detective for me in Brooklyn North Narcotics. And then I also had Tony Trotman and Dave Joseph, who both got fired from the job for corruption. Stories for another day. So I had an interesting Brooklyn North experience, to say the least. But we were doing so many arrests of narcotics related individuals at shooting and homicide scenes exactly the way you're supposed to do it. The captain would call me into his office. He goes, Tommy, what do you got going on today? I said, nothing really. What do you guys got going on? We had a shooting last night. We had a homicide last night. We're still working on the homicide from a week ago. I want you to go to this location, that location, this location, that location. And we would bring prisoners in. We would get them on narco, get them on sales, and then we would do debriefings. And because we were there with the squad, we would spend more time on these debriefings, and they weren't just cycling through them really fast. And we were developing witnesses or information on shootings and homicides like crazy.
So, Tom.
So 6 months. Yep.
Yeah, just to slow it down a lot, because it's a lot to unravel there for the people in the chat. Yep. So where do you see the benefit to the SATCOM model, and especially with your expertise with narcotics and the Detective Bureau, as opposed to, and Marlon corrected me, I mean decentralization. Centralization is what we have now. So so decentralizing it to having, a model in each patrol borough, or even if we went to, each, actual physical borough, where do you see the benefits of that decentralization?
Yeah. And it's exactly, and what I was leading to, and I'm sorry for the longer story at the beginning, but I just wanted to set it up, was that when there started being depleted, like after about a year, close to a year, a lot of the narcotics was suppressed, a lot of the violence was really getting impacted. And so there was like, people were leaving and retiring from the detective squads. They had an abundance of narcotics investigators and sergeants, and they were able, at the stroke of a pen, Bill Taylor was the commander of detectives and narcotics at that time. And he said to Captain Wells at the time, like, is there anybody you want to pick up? And with a stroke of a pen, I went from narcotics to the squad, which I did not have to go through under the normal ways that it would have taken to get done at that time. So my point is, the moving of resources and all the chess pieces on the board, a lot easier and a lot faster. All of that stuff was all under one chief. It did not have to really go to the borough. Now, there was some interference I heard going on in Police Plaza. You guys are moving too many people, too much, slow it down. And he's like, I'm doing, Dunn and Esper are like, we're doing what we need to do when we need to do it. So if it's done well and done with that authority, and it's done and Espo's head, like, they have ultimate responsibility and accountability, and they own it, extreme ownership, then they should be able to do what they want with the resources, and they did for the most part. That's the big benefit I see.
Rob, the problem I see is there's big egos. You got big ego in the chief of department. You got big egos running narcotics, and when as soon as you start playing with their pot, they're going to get pissed off and say, "Hey, this is my baby. This is how I want to do it." I mean, was there any animosity between those, like the chief of detectives, the narcotics bureau, with what you guys were doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. And I'll tell you, it comes to the QCB's question, right? I thought housing had its own borough. How would they report under SATCOM? They not only had their own borough, the Housing Borough Brooklyn, which covered Brooklyn North and Brooklyn South housing bureau, housing developments, and the PSA, 1 and in Brooklyn South, and PSA 2 and 3 in Brooklyn North. But I was the XO of PSA 2, so I used to equate it, and again, I was at the end, so I used to equate it to having a housing mommy and daddy, because we had to answer to Joe Canine because he was a SATCOM Brooklyn North commander, but yet Joanne Jaffe was still the chief of housing.
Yep.
So they didn't get along very well.
I was going to say, she's not letting you do anything.
They didn't get along very well. So it's like you had to really play, play nice. We had to answer to Joanne Jaffe, but then we had to make sure that Canine knew what Joanne Jaffe was telling us, and vice versa. So I'm sure it was the same way in the Detective Bureau to an extent, but in housing, that's how it was. So it was difficult to navigate. So to your point, Rob, with the egos, I don't think the ego gets any bigger than Joanne Jaffe. So it's difficult to navigate that sometimes, but that's when you need the police commissioner, the first deputy commissioner, to step in and say, he or she, whoever's in charge of SATCOM, is in charge. Stay in your lane. This is how the job is working, and that's what you need to do.
That's a hard
Correct.
nut. That's a hard nut to swallow. If you got
Without a doubt.
if you got 3 stars on your shoulder, that's a hard nut to swallow.
Yeah. So my chief of detectives was Bill Ali at the time, for most part. So he was DBB, and then he became chief of detectives. And so I would say that, you know, the bosses probably had some heated and passionate and spirited conversations at some point in time, but how it trickled down to me and the squad, it was not bad. So whatever interference the bosses ran appropriately, it never really affected us. And I will tell you, I had 2 homicides 2 days in a row. Both of them made the news. Both of them I had a brief Mayor Giuliani on back-to-back days. And Ali showed up in the office, and he was a gentleman. He didn't flex like, hey, this is my borough and we're running stuff. He really was, even though I knew he had tension from the DBB days before he got promoted to chief of D, but he came in like a gentleman. He did the whole pin ceremony thing for us and the detectives, and congratulated everyone on putting 2 cases down within, both of them within 24 hours, both in the news. Both had to go up to Giuliani's office, and it was fine. So yeah, you know what? The bosses need to fight up and as long as they're respectful for each other, because that means you're passionate, you care about what you're doing, and so much so that you think your way is better. That's fine. Have those spirited conversations. But to your point, Chief, is 100% correct. If this is the plan, then the police commissioner has to say, this is the plan, stick to the plan. Don't pick and choose which of these rules you want to, because your nose is out of joint and your ego's bruised.
And you think that if you did this citywide, all of the 7 boroughs, right? Because there's 2 in Manhattan, 2 in Brooklyn, and Queens is 2 also, right? And then Staten Island. If you do that, do you eliminate the position of chief of department? I mean, chief of detectives. You eliminate that? Is it a necessity to keep that then at that point, if you go citywide?
Actually, I mean, I've worked in private sector where they do this a lot. They reorganize all the time. And usually when we do a reorganization, they offer up like 3 or 4 different variations of the hierarchy and structure and the reporting and who dotted lines, who direct lines to each other. So I don't know the exact answer to that. My initial instincts, Chief, is that yes, you don't need a chief of D anymore at that point. However, you know, for ego's sake and for historical sake and you know, there's probably ways of working out a hierarchy. But at the end of the day, they answer up through that one single chief and then to the chief of department, in my opinion. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah.
You've just watched a clip from our live episode. Click the description to watch the full episode. Like, share, and subscribe for more videos just like this.